3 forth saith the Lord God, and he brought Israel up out of Egypt. In the time of Zedekiah there came the destruction of the first temple and exile in Babylon. And the Lord said, weep not, there is hope for thine issue. They shall again come forth from the hands of the enemy. Thy sons will yet return to thy lands. And 2,000 years ago came the destruction of the second temple and the dispersal. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, tells his story. I must have been 10 or 12 when my father began to take me along with him on his walks and have conversations with me about his beliefs and opinions and the world we live in. One day he told me a story to show me how much better things were in my day than they had been in his own. When I was a young man, I went for a walk one Saturday in the streets of the town where you were born. I was well dressed and I had a brand new fur hat on my head. A Christian came up to me and with one swing knocked my new hat off into the mud and shouted, "Jew, get off the sidewalk." And what did you do? I stepped down in the mud and got my hat. My father answered quietly. Warsaw, Vilna, Bialystok, Odessa, at the beginning of the 20th century. In one immense ghetto forming a broad belt stretching from the Baltic to the Black Sea, from Lithuania to the Ukraine and passing through Poland, the Jews have lived since the Middle Ages, brought together by mutual need, held together by their thousands of years of tradition, maintaining the inner feeling of an eternal unity. The old woman in Vilna knows that the old woman in Arabia or Amsterdam, using the same calendar, celebrates at the same time the grape harvest in Palestine. They recite the same prayer, passionately repeated. Next year, in Jerusalem.
Todo vernos el conocen بخلوا مقام زورا وتمتون جايمة من عربا ونخون بخلايل خلادم بخل معقلين بالعيل واتخاتوز عمرن كايتي وهم إلى شام بمرخم الكامل شيم لبنيم ولافديم شالله وهم يمكادشين كان بخلوا مقام زورا ودمتون شايمة عربا
Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam.
كذلك مشفاة العموناوين والصالح ويشهد بارك الوين والولام مبارك شام والولام يرين ومن كذا العشاء وين
If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its usefulness. Let my tongue grow to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember thee, if I do not place Jerusalem higher than my greatest joy.
باركوا عميم إلهينو شماع إسرائيل أدوناي إلهينو أدوناي
رامان الصيح مسكين للجرح
Kayo الفارق على فيك المايم كنا مشيتارق.
And in Jerusalem, Symbol of the symbol, a wall. Since the destruction of the temple by Titus 2,000 years ago, Jews have never stopped coming to pray at the foot of this symbol, the Wailing Wall. Some actually live there, cut off from all the world, spending their days in deep study of the Torah and the Talmud. Others come for a day. Still others come there to die, in the hope of seeing the Messiah. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Sultan of Constantinople rules Jerusalem. A lax administration permits all creeds. It is tolerant through indifference. Jews, Muslims, Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants, all crowd together in the holy city. Jerusalem is a teeming crossroads of uniforms and strange costumes, religions and races, all living together under the Ottoman Empire. It is written in the Talmud, the finest labor of man is the working of the land. It is to be preferred to any other. Greater is he who uses himself by toil than he who knows God. The early Jewish settlers, most of them fleeing the pogroms of Russia, began to drain the swamps and irrigate the deserts. They labored to clear away stones and brush, labor to bring fertility to a land without greenery, a land whose forests had disappeared, a land ravaged by centuries of neglect. While the traditional Jews pray for the day when the Messiah would rebuild the temple, a new people learn, after the passage of centuries, to work their land again. In the West, the Jewish question seems settled. A new tolerance, the brilliant intellectual life of European capitals, scientific progress, citizenship without prejudice, all these are alluring inducements towards integration. Paris, as the center of the civilized world, becomes the leader of the new era. Suddenly a thunderstorm explodes, the Dreyfus affair. A Jewish officer in the French army is falsely accused of espionage. A violent wave of anti-Semitism shakes France. During the course of the trial, a Viennese newspaperman hears the Parisian crowd roar, not "down with Dreyfus," but "death to the Jews." If the rights of man can be so easily tumbled from their pedestal in France, what can be expected of the other nations? This newspaperman is Theodor Herzl. His outrage and concern make of him a modern prophet. He decides that the solution to the Jewish problem is a political one, a sovereign Jewish state. He writes, "Next year in Jerusalem. This has always been our hope, but now we must make the dream come true." The first objective of Theodor Herzl, traveling salesman of the future Jewish state, is to convince the man who holds the key to Palestine, the Sultan Abdul Hamid. The Sultan welcomes the Kaiser. The Kaiser thanks the Sultan. The Kaiser has promised Herzl to plead the Zionist cause during the course of this imperial pilgrimage to the Holy Land. The conversations, drowned in political and financial intrigues, lead to nothing. Will there be a Jewish state in Palestine? Abdul Hamid and Wilhelm II leave the question carefully unanswered. These wealthy visitors, well fed in their expensive clothes, have heard of a miracle in the Holy Land. They arrive, these distinguished travelers, these generous donors. The old-time settlers explain to them, Jewish state means Jewish labor. You don't take over a country, you don't buy it. You build it with your own hands. The West gets itself involved in a different kind of festivity. The First World War begins with great enthusiasm. (1917), a year of major importance in the history of the century. For the first time, American troops participate in a European war. In Russia, the October Revolution attempts to install a new order, a new world. (1917), a year for Jewish hopes. England wants Palestine. To secure the support of Zionist leaders, Lord Balfour, British Minister of Foreign Affairs, makes public on November the 2nd his letter to Lord Rothschild. The British government will guarantee a Jewish national home in Palestine. Theodore Herzl's dream is coming true. It is now the officially promised land. Chaim Weizmann, who has done so much to obtain Balfour's declaration, arrives in Palestine at the head of the first Zionist commission. The people who welcome him believe the Jewish state already exists. To drive out the Turk, the Jews enlist with the British. But to win the war against the Turks, the British need more. They need the Arabs. They choose the man they hope can revive Arab unity and revive the Arabs' ancient fighting spirit. He is Emir Faisal of the Hashemite tribe, descendant of the Prophet and keeper of the holy city of Mecca. The British, with their usual historical luck, have a man, an intelligence service agent, a poet and archaeologist who knows the dialects of the desert tribes. He is the one who will become a legend under the name of Lawrence of Arabia. He makes Emir Faisal believe, because he believes it himself, that the Arabian Empire of Caliph Omar will rise again. Now everything is ready for the conquest of Palestine. So now, after the Egyptians, Assyrians, Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, and the Turks, the British step forward and announce themselves as Palestine's liberators. Drawing its Jewish and Arab partners into a tough desert war, the British Army moves resolutely towards a victory that will take it to Damascus. When you are victorious, nothing seems difficult. For General Allenby, British Army Chief, the time has come for all promises to be kept. General Allenby welcomes Emir Faisal to Damascus. For Faisal, all is possible in his new glory. He admits there is room in the Middle East for a Jewish national home, and in saying goodbye to the British proconsul, he is sure of owning his own Arab kingdom. After Emir Faisal, General Allenby sees Chaim Weizmann and the Zionist leaders. A Jewish national settlement, according to the Balfour Declaration, will be created. Everybody's happy. To carry out its policy of double promises, England sends to Palestine its first High Commissioner, Sir Herbert Samuel. The first tribute in the Holy Land must be paid to religion. The High Commissioner goes to the synagogue, and that's for the Jews. And then something for the Arabs. In the romantic tradition of Lawrence, Sir Herbert's son gets married in Bedouin costume. Back to the Jews. The Jewish athletes receive their trophies from the hands of the High Commissioner. And back to the Arabs. Sir Herbert smiles at the notables. Winston Churchill, colonial minister, comes to carry out the Palestine mandate which the League of Nations has conferred upon Great Britain. That mandate confirms the existence of a Jewish national home. But the British take it upon themselves immediately to exclude the right bank of the Jordan River and give it to their new favorite, Emir Abdullah, Faisal's brother. The British Army proceeds to outline borders and to cut the new states up to measure. Here it is, the new map of the Middle East. In the north, Syria and Lebanon are entrusted to the French. In the east, Iraq is given to Emir Faisal. In the middle, a kingdom is created for Emir Abdullah. This is Transjordania. There remains a territory of 16,000 square miles where the Jews may establish their national home in Palestine.
ידנו זקיפה אדמתנו אז כולה עד מה תעשה כולם ברוחמה אז מדולה אז כולה עד מה תעשה כולם ברוחמה.
From Russia, Poland, Romania, Hungary, the immigrants of the first post-war period debark. They come to find a nation. In Palestine, the first thing is to bring the land to life again. Between the Jews and the Arabs, there is now friendship, now violence. The great Arab families who own the land are often willing to sell it to the Jewish community. Once the deals are concluded, the festivities begin. But everything still remains to be done. Dry out the swamps, fertilize the desert, build the houses, transform the people.
ובימינו כל עם ישראל, יתאחד יקום ויגאל. מי ימלא גבורות ישראל לא תמיד, ישראל לא תמיד, לא יקום מגבור גואל, לא יקום מגבור גואל, גבורות ישראל לא תמיד, ישראל לא תמיד, לא יקום מגבור גואל, לא יקום מגבור גואל.
At night, everybody comes home to the kibbutz, an agricultural community where each man learns to share everything.
שחקי שחקי על החלומות, זו אני החולם שח, שחקי כי באדם מאמין, כי עודני מאמין בך, שחקי כי באדם מאמין, כי עודני מאמין בך.
On this beach was born Tel Aviv, the hill of springtime. I was in Jaffa, recalls Chaim Weitzman, when Arthur Rupin came to take me out to the sandhills north of town. When we stood in sand over our ankles on those slopes, he paused and looked around and solemnly said, "Here we shall create a Jewish town." Men who have never known labor skills learn them. There are already Jewish farmers. Now there are Jewish stonemasons, Jewish manual laborers, Jewish bricklayers. When Tel Aviv celebrates the Purim Carnival, all Jews, both the pious and the unbelievers, come together in the ancient spirit of the Bible. For the first time in 2,000 years, the wandering Jew is able to invite people to his own home. Today, April the 1st, 1925, Israel welcomes the man to whom it owes the first public recognition of its national home. The old Lord Balfour, in the sunset of his life, comes to Palestine. On Mount Scopus, facing the Dead Sea, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem opens its doors. Within these halls, the city builders, the clearers of the land, their sons and daughters, will learn only one language, a language believed dead for 2,000 years, Hebrew. Chaim Weizmann. The university will continue the age-old traditions of Hebraic learning and the Jewish struggle with the mysteries of the universe. And Lord Balfour. The Arabs must remember that in the darkest days of the somber Middle Ages, when Western civilization was buried and all but extinct in the iron grip of barbarian masters, it was the Arabs and the Jews who kept learning alive. That collaboration must go on, so that from this university, all the peoples of Palestine derive spiritual good. I declare the University of Jerusalem open. Albert Einstein writes, "You say it's nationalism, and you are not entirely wrong. But you can always apply that nasty term to any joint effort, without which we may neither live nor die in this hostile world. In any case, it is a nationalism which looks not for power, but for dignity and happiness." For the Arabs in Palestine, time runs unmeasured. Nothing has changed since the prophet spoke. Nothing has changed since Harun el-Rashid the Magnificent listened to Scheherazade unfold 1,001 tales of the Arabian Nights. It is enough to live and watch the days pass in the truth of the Quran, in submission to God's will. Europe, anti-Semitism has found its country, Germany, and its god is Adolf Hitler. He publicly declares hatred of the Jews who corrupt and threaten the purity of the race. The laws of Nuremberg decree Jews are subhuman. They must forfeit their civil rights, be turned out from their work, be excluded from society.
Dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschewisierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa. Die Völker wollen nicht mehr auf den Schlachtfeldern sterben, damit diese wurzellose internationale Rasse an den Geschäften des Krieges verdient und ihre alttestamentarische Rachsucht erfragt. Über der jüdischen Parole, Proletarier aller Länder, vereinigt euch, wird eine höhere Erkenntnis ziehen, nämlich schaffende Angehörige aller Nationen, erkennt euren gemeinsamen Feind.
Amin el-Husseini, the great Mufti of Jerusalem, calls the Arabs to a holy war against the Jews. His messengers exhort and excite the populace everywhere. Arabs, remember that the Jew is your worst enemy and your ancestors' worst enemy since ancient times. A massacre in Jaffa gives the signal. These are not scattered attempts and momentary agitation. In the spring of 1936, Arab terrorism is widespread and organized. The British want peace at any price. They try to restore order, search everybody. They act as if both sides are equally guilty. And in fact, British administration retreats from objectivity a little more with each Arab act of violence, and finally reacts as if the Jewish community, simply by its presence, is responsible for all the trouble. One investigating committee after another solves nothing. An unsettling moral decision comes before the conscience of the Zionist leaders. They are heirs to an age-old tradition of non-violence. But in order to survive, does one not have the right to use force? David Ben-Gurion, new president of the Executive Committee of the Jewish Agency, declares, "We cannot admit that our safety lies at the mercy of a foreign power." A British officer impassioned by the Zionist cause, Captain Ord Wingate, offers to teach the Jewish settlers how to organize themselves for fighting. He teaches them one strategy: to defend yourself, resist; to survive, attack. To settle and live on one's own land becomes a military operation. A small group of armed settlers leaves at dawn to occupy a piece of territory threatened by Arab groups. Hurriedly, with prefabricated elements, they build a line of defense. All must be finished before nightfall. Under the protection of the tower, a new village is born, at once an agricultural settlement and a point of military support. 70 kibbutzim are created in this way by armed settlers who can no longer separate the rifle from the plow. On September the 29th, 1938, in Munich, Neville Chamberlain and Edouard Daladier, British and French prime ministers, backed down before the dictators Hitler and Mussolini. With peace in our time in mind, they sign over Czechoslovakia to Germany. In Europe, war seems inevitable. In the Middle East, the British continue Lawrence's pro-Arab policy to secure military bases. On February the 7th, 1939, Chamberlain in London calls for a conference on Palestine. Over Zionist protests, he invites the leaders of the surrounding Arab states, Iraq, Egypt, Yemen, Transjordania. On May the 17th, 1939, the British government publishes a white paper. The Jews are forbidden to purchase new land. Jewish immigration is limited to 75,000 persons for 5 years. After this, each Jewish immigrant must be accepted by Arab authorities. The Jews are trapped between persecution in Europe and restriction in the Promised Land. For 9 million Jews, Hitler decides on the final solution. They are to be exterminated.
לכל תחנונוי אם אבוינו ישתשמור יום אדוינו מי יהמות כי ימחו על סליחו למען תבורי Kivisi adoinoi kivesunavushi Li devoro
The great Mufti of Jerusalem has asked of Hitler the right for the Arabs to settle their Jewish problems by the same method. He reviews the 13th SS Muslim Division, which will go to fight on the Russian front. He states, "This division will be our example and guiding light in the war against the common enemies of National Socialism and Islam." In Palestine, the Jews get ready to fight. David Ben-Gurion states, "We will fight against Hitler as if there were no white paper, and we shall fight against the white paper as if there were no Hitler." As early as September 1940, in Tripolitania, the Jews apply themselves to learning the difficult art of desert warfare. On May the 8th, 1945, Germany capitulates. This was the ghetto of Warsaw. In Poland, there were 3,500,000 Jews. 500,000 are left. In Germany, there were 600,000 Jews. 40,000 are left. In Czechoslovakia, there were 300,000 Jews. 30,000 are left. In Holland, there were 150,000 Jews. 60,000 are left. Out of 9 million captive Jews in Europe, 6 million are dead. Where do you want to go, the survivors are asked. The answer is always to Palestine. After that, they still must live in other camps, still must wait a long time. Some wait a very long time before coming to the land they believe to be a promised one. In Palestine after the war, nothing has changed. The 1939 White Paper is still in effect. Emir Abdullah is still Great Britain's favorite. Jewish immigration is still forbidden. Despite the blockade, the Jews are on their way to the Promised Land. They follow clandestine trails. They cross borders on the sly. Their relay stations are spaced out from northern to southern Europe. These are organized to lead the living contraband towards Italian or French shores where ships are waiting for them. But they must be satisfied with leaky old freighters. Captains and ship owners refuse to risk a good ship against the British Navy.
Schlaf mir schön Jankele mein Schöne, die Eigelach, die Schwarzinke macht zu. A Ingele, wo's hat schon alle Züngele, muss noch die Mame singen, Ei Lulu. A Ingele, wo's hat schon alle Züngele, muss noch die Mame singen, Ei Lulu.
When you near the Promised Land, look out. At the slightest suspicion, the British plane will alert the blockading warships, and the door to Palestine will be closed. Like most of these vessels, this one is discovered. Its passengers are unafraid, but they do not want themselves to be considered outlaws. Tomorrow they will be prisoners, but today they proclaim their right and title to Israeli citizenship. Exodus, 1947. This decrepit tub was designed for 700 passengers. It carries 4,500 survivors of the extermination camps. Beset and harried by the British fleet, they have fought back. They refuse to go anywhere except Palestine. For a few hours, they have touched the promised land. Months and years after the end of the war, British rule in Palestine sends them back to other camps on prison ships. For the Jews, there remains only one way out of this impasse: underground action and terrorism. Two secret organizations, the Irgun Zwei Lumi and the Stern Gang, throw themselves into violence. Their members attack English units everywhere. Reprisals and retaliations exceed each other. Commando groups bomb the symbols of British presence: tax collectors' offices, immigration offices, the police stations. On July the 22nd, 1946, in Jerusalem, the King David Hotel is blown up. In it was the army and police headquarters. The terrorists had given telephone warnings. They were not believed. 110 dead. The whole country is ablaze from attacks and reprisals. The Jewish Agency still considers itself the true government of Palestine. Its underground army, the Haganah, controls each kibbutz, each town, each factory. Its people scour the world to mobilize sympathy, collect money, find weapons. To fight against the Jewish terrorism, 100,000 British soldiers invest Palestine. Every day they arrest men who will not accept imprisonment in their own land. Each village is searched house by house to find the weapons which the underground replaces as soon as they are confiscated. Divided into square patterns of barbed wire, the towns become prisons where the British watch the Jews and the Jews the British. The situation leaves no way out. England resigns itself to giving up its mandate. The problem falls into the lap of the infant United Nations organization.
We will proceed the roll call. You all know how to vote. Those who are in favor will say yes. Those who are against will say no. And the abstainers, always they know what to say. We will start it now.
Afghanistan? No. Argentina? Argentina? Abstention? Australia? Yes. Belgium? Yes. France? Yes.
I call on the public, and I hope that you will not have any interference
on the voting on the debate. I am confident on the way you will behave in a so serious decision taken by this assembly, because I am decided not to allow anybody to interfere in our decisions.
Ukraine? Yes. South Africa? Yes. Soviet Union? Yes. The United Kingdom? Abstain. The United States? Yes. Uruguay? Yes. Venezuela? Yes. Yemen? No. Yugoslavia? Abstain.
On November the 29th, 1947, the General Assembly of the United Nations votes the partition of Palestine into two states, one Arab and the other Jewish.
10 abstentions.
How can the Jewish state endure? It cannot. It is absurd. It is vulnerable. It is far from Zionist hopes. Such as it is, however, it is the accomplishment of a 2,000-year-old dream. Jews at last have sovereign rights on their own land.
וזוהי סתוירו אשר מוישה לפני בני ישראל על פי אדוני ביד מוישה יצחיים מלמה חזיקים בו וסומכך ומיושרור דרוכי ודרכינם וכל נסיבו עושהו שולו.
The Arabs, however, immediately and definitively refused to accept the UN compromise. Palestinian Arab volunteers are armed and formed into commandos. Arab General Staff with headquarters in Beirut decides it will drive the Jews into the sea. Other commando troops coming from Syria and Iraq enter Palestine. The Mufti of Jerusalem inspects his troops. Once more, the Grand Mufti calls for a holy war. On Friday, December the 5th, 1947, as people come out of the mosques, the attacks start. In Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Jaffa, Jewish stores are set fire. Isolated persons are caught and shot down.
اذبح كل الصهيونية لا تخلي بقلبك حنية اذبح كل الصهيونية لا تخلي بقلبك حنية وارمي رقابهم بالبرية وقد ما فيك يا خيي اذبح ارمي رقابهم بالبرية قد ما فيك يا خيي اذبح
اذبح اذبح اذبح اذبح اذبح اذبح اذبح اذبح اذبح تربح اذبح 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 تربح اذبح 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 تربح
اذبح لا ترحم صهيوني وتنضل خليها تذبح اذبح لا ترحم صهيوني وتنضل خليها تذبح
اذبح 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 تربح اذبح 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 تربح اذبح 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 تربح
اذبح لا ترحم صهيوني وتنضل خليها تذبح اذبح لا ترحم صهيوني وتنضل خليها.
The British authorities do nothing. Arab troops pouring in from all the neighboring countries control the lines of communication. The surrounded Jews defend themselves on the spot as best they can with the aid of their underground organizations. The British still maintain their embargo on weapons. Everything must be improvised. The British refuse to acknowledge the Haganah as an official army. The underground fighters come out into the open daylight and the Jews carry out an offensive.
מסביב יהום מסעת, אך ראשנו לא ישע, לפקודה תמיד אנחנו תמיד, אנו הפלמ"ח. ממטולה עד הנגב, מן הים עד המדבר.
They seized the regions which the UN has already granted them. Hundreds of thousands of Arabs leave their homes, driven away by fears aggravated by the various Arab radios. They can, they are told, count on a triumphant return after Arab victory. The warfare is merciless. Massacres reply to massacres on both sides. On April the 9th, 1948, a commando of the Irgun, the Jewish terrorist organization, takes over the Arab village of Der Yashin and kills all its inhabitants. 250 men, women, and children. The Jewish authorities arrest, try, and convict the leaders. On May the 14th, 1948, the last British High Commissioner, Sir Alan Cunningham, leaves Palestine. That same day, May the 14th, 1948, David Ben-Gurion proclaims the birth of the State of Israel. Exiled from Palestine, our people have remained faithful to it during all the centuries and in all the countries of dispersal. It has always hoped to restore its national freedom here. I proclaim the foundation of the Jewish state in Palestine, which will bear the name of Israel. That Independence Day, May the 14th, 1948, is also the day of invasion. The Lebanese, Syrians, Iraqi, and Egyptian armies, plus the Arab Legion of Transjordania, enter Palestine. A big battle is fought for Jerusalem. Both sides badly want the sacred city. For both sides, the holy city is the mystic symbol, as well as the military symbol of victory. The UN imposes a truce on June the 11th, 1948. The old town of Jerusalem is in the hands of the Arab Legion. The Israelis are encircled in the new town. During the truce, Ben-Gurion rearms, unifies, and reorganizes the Israeli troops. Almost incredibly, an improvised road is built in secrecy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Night and day, the Israelis work at it to bypass the old normal route controlled by the Arab Legion. Reinforcements arrive in Jerusalem. On July the 9th, 1948, the Council of the Arab League, meeting in Cairo, decides to resume the war. Immediately, the Israelis attack. The single strategy of Ord Wingate has been well learned. In the north, they seize Nazareth and all of Galilee. In the center, they resist in Jerusalem. In the south, they thrust deep into the Negev desert and reach the Red Sea. The UN sends a mediator, Count Bernadotte, member of the royal family of Sweden. He tries to persuade the Zionist leaders to abandon the UN's partition plan and give up the Negev desert to the Arabs. At that price, he thinks that the Arab leaders will accept the peace treaty with the Jewish state. On the Arab side, his most dependable mediator is the envoy of Emir Abdullah, Glub Pasha, an ex-officer in the British Army, now in command of the Arab Legion. He proposes to link the Arab part of Palestine to Transjordania. On September the 17th, 1948, Bernadotte has just sent the UN a report violently contested by the Israelis. He rides in his car through Jerusalem. He is assassinated by the Stern Gang, the most extreme of Jewish terrorist groups. On February the 24th, 1949, armistice agreements stopped the war. Arab Palestine is annexed by Transjordania, which from now on will be called Jordan. The Arab states refuse to recognize the State of Israel or the borders of the ceasefire. "700,000 Palestinian refugees camp on Israel's border. They are the guilty conscience of the Jewish state. The UN gives them barely enough subsistence allowance to exist. The Arab countries harbor them but refuse to integrate them. They prefer to maintain them as refugees on Israel's borders, a subtle form of increasing the pressures upon the Jewish state. It is a fine way of keeping alive the spirit of revenge." In Israel, the first law is the law of return. Each Jew has the historical right to return to Israel if he wishes. By the single act of immigrating, he becomes a citizen. The Yemenite Jews have not moved for 25 centuries. Even so, for them, the law of return is not a state of man-made law, but God's law, the fulfillment of a prophecy. The Lord found his people in the glaring solitude of the desert. Like the eagle, he watches over his brood, and one day will fly them away. Miraculously, that day has come. Airplanes come to take them away. They have never seen any of these machines, but they are not astonished by them. This is the eagle, foretold for centuries. The promise has been kept. "700,000 Jews have come from Europe, from Asia, from Africa. All of them learn Hebrew, the language of the new nation. The experts are pessimistic. To welcome so many immigrants stripped of everything is impossible. How can so many come from such totally different origins into such a small state? But the experts are confounded the 700,000 old settlers create a home for the 700,000 newcomers. In 1956, the new hero of Arab nationalism is Egypt's new leader, Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser is the champion of active neutralism. The Soviet Union equips his army without attaching political strings. On July the 26th, 1956, Nasser nationalizes the Suez Canal. Tonight, our Egyptian canal will be managed by Egyptians.
من أجل هذا اليوم، من أجل النهارده، من أجل 18 يونيو، من أجل الجلاء، من أجل العزة، ومن أجل الحرية، من أجل الكرامة، من أجل الاستقلال. المعارك اللي دخلتها الثورة من أول ما قامت في 23 يوليو سنة 52 كانت من أجل تحقيق هذه الآمال كلها، ومن أجل تحقيق هذه الأهداف كلها. كان هناك أيها المواطنون فئة من أبناء هذا الوطن، كان في ناس بتتغلب عليهم الانفرادية، وناس بتتغلب عليهم المصلحة الخاصة، وناس بتتغلب عليهم المصلحة الذاتية، وناس بيبصوا إلى الماضي وبيفكروا في الثراء ويفكروا في استغلال النفوذ. وكانت الثورة بتحاربهم وتقاومهم لأنهم كانوا بيحاربوها، وكانوا بيعتبروا بأنها ستحرمهم من استغلال النفوذ، هتحرمهم من السلطة، هتحرمهم من السلطان، هتحرمهم من الحاجات اللي تعودوا عليها على مر السنين. كانوا بيعتبروا ان هذه الثورة.
On October the 25th, the Syrian and Jordanian armies are placed under an Egyptian command. For Israel, the danger is immediate. Any joint attack from these three bodies of troops could very well cut the Jewish state in two. On October the 29th, the Israeli army attacks in the Sinai. In 100 hours, it reaches the Suez Canal. In a week, it defeats the Egyptian army and holds the Sinai Peninsula in its hands. Great Britain and France do not accept Egypt's nationalization of the canal. On November the 4th, their troops land in Port Said. Using the threat of atomic war, Russia demands that the invasion troops be withdrawn. The United States, under President Eisenhower, agrees and approves. Long gone is the time when England was all-powerful in the Middle East. In the Sinai, the victory of the Israelis is total. They have opened the Red Sea to their ships. They have knocked out or captured the bases of Arab terrorists who trickled into Israel. They have annihilated the Egyptian army. Now the big powers demand that they withdraw from the conquered territories and put their trust in the UN soldiers who will stand between them and Egypt. Ben-Gurion is forced to plead and argue to convince the Israeli soldiers that the real victory is not that of armies. The state of Israel is alone in the Middle East, a small island in a hostile world which would deny Israel the right even to exist. Peace is impossible to negotiate. War, it is forbidden for them to win it. 35 centuries ago in the Sinai, the Lord spoke to Moses. Since then, it seems it has been the Jewish people's destiny to be always apart. Why is it so difficult to make the Jewish people into a state which exists like all the others? Isaiah, we waited for light, and we have darkness. For clarity, and we walk in obscurity. We feel our way blinded along a wall. As if deprived of eyes, we hesitate. We stumble in bright day as if at dusk, and we inhabit the shades of night like the dead. Anne Frank, 6 million dead. These two are things that have not been explained to a victorious people. Israeli secret agents find and kidnap Adolf Eichmann in Argentina. They bring back the technician of mass deportation and extermination. To the tribunal which sits on his case in Jerusalem, Eichmann answers,
Sinne der Anklage nicht schuldig.
Not guilty. He organized death camps. He organized death itself. He kept an account of corpses. He kept an account of teeth. But he did what he did on orders. He had orders, Eichmann. When you execute an order, you're not responsible. Those who issue the orders are the ones responsible. The judges in Jerusalem take months to draw their conclusions. Any man is guilty if he executes orders which aim at the extermination of a people. No one escapes that responsibility. A dispersed people, a landless nation, has no capacity to resist. Without a state, without organization, no amount of courage is sufficiently effective. After a one-year trial, the tribunal sentences Adolf Eichmann to death for the crime of genocide, the only crime punishable by death in the laws of Israel. Everyday life is the difficult thing. To feed a population which has increased fourfold in 20 years, to build factories, to bring water to the desert, to fertilize the land. From Jordan, sabotage specialists trickle in. From the Golan Heights, Syrians shell the kibbutzim. Endlessly, work is interrupted. Houses are destroyed. On Israel's borders, threatening shouts are repeated. Brothers, it is the battle of the Arab land, the battle of destiny. The real freedom of our whole territory depends upon the liquidation of the Zionist state. The Arabs are firmly set upon erasing Israel from the map, upon restoring Palestine's honor. The Syrian Minister of Foreign Affairs states, "We have nothing to lose in fighting a popular war of liberation. Arab nations can only unite through fighting. Israel cannot be eliminated except through fighting." In May of 1967, Colonel Nasser states that the Arabs are ready to fight. The Syrian, Jordanian, Iraqi armies go under Egyptian command. The blockade of Israel by the Red Sea is decreed by Nasser and immediately carried out. President Nasser demands also of the UN's General Secretary, U Thant, the withdrawal of UN troops who, for 10 years, have guaranteed navigational freedom for the Israelis in the Red Sea. The UN troops are immediately withdrawn. The Arab armies and Israeli troops are face to face. What recourse does the government of Israel have? International guarantees? But these have failed to work in the crisis. 30 years of struggle have shown that Ord Wingate's old precept is still the truth. The only possible defense is to attack. On June the 5th, 1967, the decision is made. Israel chooses war. On the 6th day, everything is over. The ceasefire finds the Israeli army on the banks of the Suez Canal and on the shores of the Jordan. Outside, the Egyptian, Jordanian, and Syrian armies are destroyed. Inside, Israelis must now live together with 1 million Arabs. "300,000 of these prefer to leave Palestine. This new exodus is the bitterness of victory. It is also the uncertainty and the difficulty of whatever future is to come." For the first time in 20 years, the Jews have access to the Wailing Wall.
שקט. אני חושב שיקשה להביע במילים את ההרגשה שלנו. בסדר. צריך שפה יהיה סדר. טוב, אבל אני רוצה לדעת מה יש. מותר לי לדעת.
The victorious general, Moshe Dayan, writes his wish. According to the old tradition, he places it in the wall. On this scrap of paper, a single word: peace.
ציון תמתי, ציון חמדתי, לכן נפשי מרחוק מיד. תשכח ימיני אם אשכחך יפתי, עד תתרבור קברי עלי פיה. ציון תמתי